Hello, dear children. Welcome to the class. Today is the fifth session of this chapter ratio analysis. In the last session, we had discussed about two of the solvency ratios, that is debt to equity ratio and total assets to debt ratio. In today's session, we'll be discussing about the proprietary ratio and interest coverage ratio. These are also one among the solvency ratios. Now, before discussion, I would like to discuss this thought. You can see in the picture that a man, he is sculpturing his destiny. See, a man cannot remake himself without suffering, for he is both the marble and the sculpture. See, we all know that there is no gains with no pains. Fine, the gains are all only going to come to you if you are going to take pains, you are going to put in hard work. Regarding us, we human beings, we really have to put in a lot of effort to reshape our destiny. Fine. Opportunities will be provided to us. It is we have to grasp the opportunity and make the best use of it. So that is why we human beings, we are both the marble and the sculpture itself. I would like to acknowledge that this content of this video is purely educational. Many thanks to the sites and the authors of the book from where the content has been taken. To begin with, let's start with the first solvency ratio, that is proprietary ratio. Proprietary ratio establishes the relationship between proprietor's fund and total assets. And we know that proprietor fund is the sum of share capital and reserves and surplus. If we look into the formula of calculating, computing proprietary ratio, it says proprietor's fund or shareholders fund upon total assets. See, you can very well see that this ratio tells us that how much part of the total assets are being financed through proprietors fund. So if more of the assets are being financed through proprietors fund, that means there is a scope for us for raising funds through loans or your debt, issuing debentures, loan from financial institutions, etc. That means our long term solvency position is sound. The objectives and significance of calculating this ratio is to measure the proportion of total assets financed by the proprietors fund. This is what we were discussing in the last slide also. The ratio is important for creditors as they can ascertain the proportion of shareholders fund in the total assets employed in the firm. Now see, if the proportion of shareholders fund is more, that means the long term solvency position of the business is sound. अब क्यों हम ऐसा कहते हैं कि लॉन्ग टर्म सॉल्वेंसी पोजीशन साउंड है? क्योंकि अगर आपके ज़्यादातर एसेट प्रोप्राइटर्स फंड से फाइनेंस है, तो इसका मतलब बोरोड फंड आपके कैपिटल स्ट्रक्चर में कम है तो दैट मीन्स you are at a better position, you can raise funds whenever required. A high ratio indicates adequate safety for creditors, but a very high ratio indicates improper mix of proprietors fund and loan funds which result in lower return on capital. बेटा हम सबको पता है कि फंड अगर कभी रेस करने होते हैं तो देयर आर ओनली टू सोर्सेज ऑफ फंड. फर्स्ट इज द ओनर्स फंड. ओनर्स फंड को हम क्या कहते हैं? इक्विटी. Fine. Owner's fund is your equity or your shareholders fund, and second is your borrowed fund, and borrowed fund is debt. Now, if my proprietary ratio is high, high means that majority of my assets are being financed through equity, यानी कि मेरे कैपिटल स्ट्रक्चर में डेट कम है, मेरे कैपिटल स्ट्रक्चर में डेट कम है। डेट कम होने से क्या होगा कि सी सबसे पहले डेट चीपेस्ट सोर्स ऑफ फाइनेंस होता है, यानी कि मैंने अगर इक्विटी ज़्यादा रखी हुई है अपने कैपिटल स्ट्रक्चर में, तो आई हैव इशूड अ कॉस्टली सोर्स ऑफ फाइनेंस, and it may result, if very high ratio is there, it may result lower return on investment. But a reasonably high ratio indicate, reasonably high proprietor ratio indicate एडिक्वेट सेफ्टी फॉर क्रेडिटर्स। हम क्यों बोलेंगे एडिक्वेट सेफ्टी फॉर क्रेडिटर्स? कि हमारे ज्यादातर एसेट्स जो हैं वो शेयर होल्डर्स फंड से फाइनेंस है, तो वी कैन रेज फंड्स थ्रू डेट whenever required. I hope this point is clear to everyone. A low ratio, on the other hand, indicates lower or inadequate safety for the creditors. It may lead to unwillingness of creditors to extend credit to the enterprise, क्योंकि अगर आपका डेट ऑलरेडी बहुत ज्यादा है ना, तो the creditors may be unwilling to extend credit to you. It is so because in case of liquidation, creditors being unsecured are likely to lose their money. Now let's discuss the last insolvency ratio, that is last solvency ratio. Let me correct myself. This is one of the last solvency ratio, that is interest coverage ratio. This ratio establishes the relationship between net profit before interest and tax and interest payable on long-term debts. Fine. That is, in while calculating this ratio, the relationship between profit before interest and tax, that is profit which we have earned before charging the interest and tax, and interest payable on long term debts. Interest is charged on profits, therefore net profit before interest and tax is taken to calculate the ratio. The profit which we are going to take for the purpose of calculation of this ratio is a profit which is earned and which is there before charging interest and tax. The formula for calculating interest coverage ratio is net profit before interest and tax upon interest obligation, and this ratio is expressed in times. The objective and significance behind calculating this ratio is the ratio is very meaningful to debenture holders and lenders of the long term funds. The objective of calculating this ratio is to ascertain the amount of profit available to cover the interest. See, a high ratio is considered better for lenders as it means higher safety for them. Let us understand the last line with the help of an example. Again, I'll repeat this line. The line says a high ratio is considered better for lenders as it means higher safety for them, means higher the ratio, better it is. Now, why it is better? Because a high ratio indicates that a better safety margin is there for the lender, because the profit, see, you basically in this ratio we are establishing a relationship between profit and the interest obligation. Now we can have two example to prove our point. Now let's look into these two cases. Now in the first case, beta, the net profit before interest and tax is 1 lakh and interest obligation is 50,000. Now interest obligation 50,000 means that we have a borrowed funds in our capital structure, and on that we have to pay 50,000 interest. Now if we calculate the interest coverage ratio, the formula of which is net profit before interest and tax upon interest obligation, this is your 1 lakh upon 50,000, which is equal to 2 times. Fine. In the second case, you see that the net profit before interest and tax is same 1 lakh, but the interest obligation is now 20,000. Interest obligation is 20,000. If we'll put the values in the formula, we'll get net profit before interest and tax upon interest obligation, which is 1 lakh upon 20,000, which is 5 times. Fine, it is 5 times. Now you can very well see that higher the ratio, better it is. Reason being, बेटा देखिए जो सेकंड केस है, अगर मेरी इंटरेस्ट ऑब्लिगेशन 20,000 एज कंपेयर टू 50,000 इन द फर्स्ट केस, फाइन, व्हाट डज इट मीन? इट मीन्स कि मैंने फर्स्ट केस में ज्यादा बोरोड फंड रेज कर रखा है, सेकंड केस में कम, तभी तो मेरी इंटरेस्ट ऑब्लिगेशन सेकंड केस में 20,000 है एज कंपेयर टू 50,000 इन द फर्स्ट केस. तो बच्चे, अगर मेरी इंटरेस्ट ऑब्लिगेशन कम होती है, इसका मतलब मैंने कम बोरोड फंड अपने कैपिटल स्ट्रक्चर में रेज कर रखा है, तो मेरी इंटरेस्ट कवरेज रेशियो हायर होती है. और अगर हायर इंटरेस्ट कवरेज रेशियो होगी तो इट इज अ interest coverage ratio higher, better it is. It's a complete sign that अगर हम अपने इंटरेस्ट कवरेज रेशियो को हायर रखते हैं, इसका मतलब हमारे पास ज़्यादा सेफ्टी मार्जिन है फॉर द क्रेडिटर्स. यानी कि अगर मुझे अपने ज़्यादा फंड्स रेज करने हैं, इफ़ आई वांट टू रेज एडिशनल फंड्स, तो द कंपनी कैन इजीली गो फॉर रेजिंग फंड्स थ्रू लोन्स, थ्रू योर इशू ऑफ डिबेंचर्स. फाइन, क्योंकि कंपनी के पास अभी सेफ्टी मार्जिन है, उसके पास अपने कैपिटल स्ट्रक्चर में ऑलरेडी डेट कम रेज किया हुआ है. I hope by these two cases, the implication of the interest coverage ratio is clear to everyone.
Now let's take one question from the book TS Grewal 2020 edition, Analysis of Financial Statements. This question has been taken from the chapter number 4, that is accounting ratios. It is question number 63. Now we have to calculate interest coverage ratio. We have to calculate interest coverage ratio and we are given three things. First is net profit after tax 7 lakh, 6% debentures 20 lakh, and tax rate is 30%. Now we know that the formula for calculating interest coverage ratio is that profit before interest and tax upon interest obligation, that is interest on long-term debt. Fine. But in the question, you see that we are given net profit after tax. So we have to first calculate the numerator, that is net profit before interest and tax. Now first understand the concept beta. देखिए, पहले हमारे पास क्या दिया होता है? पहले हमारे पास जो प्रॉफिट दिया होता है वो बिफोर इंटरेस्ट एंड टैक्स ही होता है. बिफोर इंटरेस्ट एंड टैक्स मतलब, बिफोर इंटरेस्ट एंड टैक्स का मतलब कि उस प्रॉफिट में से इंटरेस्ट ऑब्लिगेशन सब्ट्रैक्टेड नहीं है एंड टैक्स इज आल्सो नॉट सब्ट्रैक्टेड. इस प्रॉफिट में से सबसे पहले वी सब्ट्रैक्ट इंटरेस्ट ऑब्लिगेशन, इंटरेस्ट ऑन लॉन्ग टर्म बोरोइंग्स. रीजन क्यों हम पहले इसको सब्ट्रैक्ट करते हैं क्योंकि वी नो दैट इंटरेस्ट ऑन लॉन्ग टर्म बोरोइंग इज अ चार्ज अगेंस्ट प्रॉफिट, देना ही देना है, चार्ज अगेंस्ट प्रॉफिट होता है, हमने ये देना ही देना है, चाहे हमारे बिजनेस में प्रॉफिट हो या लॉस हो। इंटरेस्ट ऑब्लिगेशन सब्ट्रैक्ट करके हमारे पास प्रॉफिट आ जाता है, प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स, प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स, जिसमें से टैक्स सब्ट्रैक्टेड नहीं है, और इसमें से, इस प्रॉफिट में से हम टैक्स को सब्ट्रैक्ट करते हैं तो हमारे पास आ जाता है प्रॉफिट आफ्टर टैक्स, मतलब वो प्रॉफिट जो कि टैक्स के बाद अवेलेबल होता है फॉर मेकिंग एप्रोप्रिएशंस, फॉर डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ डिविडेंड्स टू दी शेयर होल्डर्स, फाइन, सो वी विल गेट प्रॉफिट आफ्टर टैक्स। अब बेटा क्वेश्चन में मेरे पास नेट प्रॉफिट आफ्टर टैक्स दिया हुआ, यानी कि मेरे पास ये फिगर दी हुई है, मुझे सबसे पहले, और मुझे क्या निकालना है, प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स। तो सबसे पहले मैं क्या करूंगी, प्रॉफिट आफ्टर टैक्स में टैक्स को अगर ऐड कर दूं, आई विल बी गेटिंग प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स, और उसके अंदर इंटरेस्ट ऑब्लिगेशन जो कि वील कैलकुलेट फ्रॉम दिस पार्ट 6% डिवेंचर ऑफ ₹20 लाख, इंटरेस्ट ऑब्लिगेशन को ऐड कर दूंगी तो मेरे पास न्यूमरेटर आ जाएगा प्रॉफिट बिफोर इंटरेस्ट एंड टैक्स। अगेन आई रिपीट माई सेल्फ, प्रॉफिट आफ्टर टैक्स में अगर मैं टैक्स को ऐड कर दूं तो आई विल गेट प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स, प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स में इंटरेस्ट ऑब्लिगेशन ऐड कर दूं तो आई विल गेट प्रॉफिट बिफोर इंटरेस्ट एंड टैक्स which is required for the calculation of interest coverage ratio। अब बेटा क्योंकि मेरे को ये तो पता है टैक्स रेट 30% है, 30% किसका होगा, प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स का, सो लेट अस अज्यूम, है ना, आप जो टैक्स कैलकुलेट करते हो वो प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स के ऊपर, बिकॉज परसेंटेज गिवन है टैक्स रेट की, तो ये परसेंटेज किसी के ऊपर तो लगेगी, वो किसके ऊपर लगती है, प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स के ऊपर। सो लेट अस अज्यूम दैट लेट द प्रॉफिट बिफोर टैक्स बी एक्स, फाइन, let the profit before tax be x, let profit before tax be rupees x। Now if the profit before tax is rupees x, so tax rate will be, tax on profit, it is given to us, it is calculated as 30%, so tax on profit will be 30% of your x, 30% of x, fine। So we are given net profit after tax, so let's put the values in the formula, net profit after tax, net profit after tax will be net profit before tax, I just use the abbreviation net profit before tax minus tax, let's put the value, it is x minus 30% of x, and net profit after tax is given to us, so we'll substitute the values 7 lakh. Now if I solve it for x, which implies 7 lakh is equal to, I have taken the LCM 100, so numerator is 100x minus 30x, which is equal to 70x upon 100, it is equal to 70x upon 100, so let me solve it for x, which implies 7 lakh is equal to 70x upon 100. So if I calculate this, I'll get x is equal to 7 lakh into 100 divided by 70. It is equal to, if I solve it, I'm going to get 1 10 lakh. Fine. So my profit before interest and tax, we have assumed x, और x की value क्या आ गई 10 lakh. अब profit before interest and tax के अंदर बच्चे, if I'm going to add interest obligation, yes, if I'm going to add, so profit before interest and tax is x and the value of x is 10 lakh. Now interest calculated on your long-term loans will be 6% debentures है बेटा, 20 lakh के हैं, so interest obligation would be 6% of 20 lakhs, and 6% of 20 lakh, if we calculate, we'll get rupees 1,20,000. Interest is 1,20,000. Now, if I add interest in profit before tax, we will get net profit before interest and tax. Fine. So, interest we have calculated it is 1,20,000. Let's calculate profit before interest and tax would be, let's say if this is 1 profit before tax, this is 2 interest obligation. So profit before tax is 1, before interest and tax will be 1 plus 2. We will add profit before tax and interest. We will get profit before interest and tax. So if I substitute the value, it is 10 lakh plus 1,20,000, and the profit before interest and interest tax would be 11,20,000. It is 11,20,000. We know interest obligation 1,20,000. Profit before interest and tax 11,20,000. Let's substitute the value in the formula for calculating the interest coverage ratio. So if I substitute the values which I have calculated, it is profit before interest and taxes 11,20,000 and interest obligation 1,20,000. So if I calculate it, so this is 9.33, and we know that this ratio is expressed in times. Interest coverage ratio is expressed in times. So the answer is 9.33 times. I hope that the explanation of the interest coverage ratio along with your proprietary ratio is clear to everyone. Hope all of you have enjoyed the learning today. That's all for today from my side. Thank you very much.